Mr. Mulroney, we're here at the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. We've just finished watching your session on the Canadian-American relationship, and I want to read a quote from the March issue of Policy Options to get us started here, in which you said, "The most important file on my desk and on the desk of any Prime Minister of Canada is the Canada-U.S. relationship." So let's start there. Why is that number one?
Well, because they're our neighbors, our largest trading partner by far, friends, allies with whom we have border and security matters that govern our lives. And so there's that. Plus there is the fact that because we're cheek by jowl with the Americans, our influence internationally is often predicated on the extent to which foreign leaders perceive us as having influence in the Oval Office.
So if we're on better terms with them, the rest of the world notices.
They know it. They know it. You hear about it all the time. They phone you and ask you to intervene with the president because there are 200 leaders around the world, 200 countries, trying to get audiences with him, trying to talk to him, and most don't get through.
Have you got a for instance on that? Sometimes some foreign leader called you and said, look, I can't get through to Reagan or Bush, but maybe you could run some interference for us?
Sure. I remember a moment that the President Bush, just before the Gulf War, had given a press conference. And in the press conference, he said, after this, I will be on the phone with my friend Prime Minister Mulroney, and then we're going to do such and such and so and so. And it was early morning for some reason, the press conference before the war. And I was at 24 Sussex, and I watched it on TV. 5 minutes later, the switchboard, Prime Minister's switchboard, said, I have a call from President Abdou Diouf, who was the president of Senegal. And he said, I just heard on TV at CNN that President Bush said he would be calling you momentarily. I've been trying to get this item on the agenda for some time unsuccessfully. Could you raise with him such and such?
And did you?
Sure I did.
You did, okay.
Absolutely I did.
I was interested in your characterization that is job one, because I always thought the number one file on any Canadian Prime Minister's desk was keeping the country together.
Well, that's just an assumption. Of course, that's what you have to do.
But I inferred from this that this is actually bigger than that.
Well, no, no country, no, you don't need anything else. Okay. No, of course. So inherent in your responsibilities is that, of course. I'm talking about the exercise of your power as your authority as Prime Minister in terms of your relationships.
Gotcha. Okay, 20 years ago you signed that historic acid rain agreement with the United States. You also, of course, did the free trade agreement. You also did the Arctic sovereignty agreement. These were big ideas, big projects.
And NAFTA.
And NAFTA came, of course, in 1993. Yeah. Big ideas, big projects, and I wonder whether those days are gone. Some people think the idea, the era of the big idea is gone now. What do you think?
Well, there's been a dearth of them in recent years, but that may be because of the nature of a minority parliament. You know, it's hard to get, if you have a majority, you can do things that are easier than the situation in which Mr. Harper found himself and finds himself, particularly with an uncooperative opposition. When
is the opposition ever cooperative?
Never. Certainly not in my experience.
I just wondered, yeah.
Certainly not in my experience. Although when Mr. Chrétien was there, the Reform Party always were voting with him on budgetary things because they said he wasn't going far enough.
Right.
I didn't have that experience. So, yeah, I think that there are big ideas out there. For example, the Canada-European Union Free Trade Agreement that they're presently negotiating. The border security issue, Canada-US, which is out there.
Does that rival what you were trying to do 20 years ago, do you think, in
No,
terms of a big project?
It's a big project, but because the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement was foundational, it probably takes a little priority, but it still remains big ideas. No, there are great things that the country can do, and you know, I think we have an interesting time here in Canada. You've got Prime Minister Harper, who's clearly a competent prime minister. You've got Mr. Ignatieff, who has the worst job in Canada, by the way. I had that job as leader of the opposition. This is a tough, thankless job. And he's an intelligent man, hardworking guy. You never can tell what happens in political life. I'll tell you this. In 1984, when the campaign started, I was 14 points behind. And we ended up in a rather different fashion. So you never can tell what'll happen in that regard. You've got Mr. Layton, who's an outstanding leader of his party. And you've got Gilles, his father, by the way, was in my caucus, in my cabinet.
In your cabinet.
Caucus. The finest gentleman who ever sat in the House of Commons.
Robert Layton.
Was Robert Layton. And then you've got Gilles Duceppe, who, while he espouses a point of view certainly different from mine, he's respected in Quebec. So these are people of quality. And with that, after an election, after you get the stuff out of the system, however it turns out, you can do big things, even if you have a minority parliament. Witness what happened to Mr. Pearson, who achieved great things with minority status.
I was intrigued in your description downstairs of the importance of personal relationships in trying to move files forward. And of course, it's legendary. You had an excellent relationship with Ronald Reagan and with George Bush the father. And I wonder if you could go into that a little bit more. How does it enhance the notion of moving the big idea forward when you're on, when you're on a Ron and George Brian first name basis with these other leaders?
Where it becomes important, indeed indispensable, is that only the President of the United States can energize his entire system. When the Prime Minister goes there, if he's privileged to have an excellent relationship with the President, and they're sitting around the cabinet table, for example, with Ronald Reagan, and Reagan would listen to everything, and there were like 7 cabinet secretaries and 5 advisors or whatever it was, and Reagan would listen, and then he would say, I want this to happen. I want this to happen with Canada. That was the end of the debate. Reagan thereby energized the entire system. And these people had everything riding on it, Reagan's success and their own careers.
Now the question is, does he energize the system more energetically because he knows you, likes you, trusts you?
He wouldn't even do it if he didn't.
So that matters.
You wouldn't get to see him. There are all kinds of leaders around the world who never see the inside of the White House. So to be able to come and go as we did, and to be in constant telephone communication, putting forward Canada's agenda, but helping the United States every time we could.
It is a balancing act, though, isn't it? Because,
It is.
because being anti-American plays well at home.
Yeah.
How do you walk that balance?
Well, look, I ran in 2 elections as someone who was pro-American, and I won both of them. So the anti-Americanism is overblown, but it has a constituency. There's a left-wing constituency in the country that is really attracted to this kind of stuff, and they have supporters in the media, radio and television, and
Your favorites are the Toronto Star and the CBC.
well, in my time, I don't follow it much anymore, so I don't know what it's like now.
Every time I've interviewed you, you've said that. You say, I don't follow this stuff so much anymore, but you must. I mean, you're a junkie for this, aren't you?
No, I'm not. No,
Really? Not
I
anymore?
was. No, I was, but I'm really not anymore.
Okay, having said all that, my hunch is, and I think I'm on solid ground with this, Prime Minister Harper and President Obama do not have as close a personal relationship as, say, you and Ronald Reagan did or you and George Bush did. Does that mean Canada and the United States will necessarily not be able to achieve great things given that lack of a strong rapport?
No, what I understand is that they have a good relationship.
But not great, not like you guys
Well,
had.
we had a good one. And I'm not there sitting in the Oval Office with them, so I can't judge. Maybe it's terrific. All I know is it's certainly good and very good. Now, one of the problems is the tremendous demands on the president's time. So to get heard, to get understood, to get energized, to mobilize the administration, to set Canada up there as a priority, believe me, you've got to get up early in the morning and you've got to press your case and your advantage all the time. And that's what has to be done. And we'll see after the election how this moves along.
Sure. Since we're in the realm of personal relationships here and their significance in politics, I hope you will forgive me if I tread on some somewhat delicate ground here. But I want to ask you about your former ambassador to France, your former cabinet colleague, Lucien Bouchard, with whom you used to be really great friends. And then, I guess in the way you would say it, he betrayed you over the Meech Lake Accord. Left your government, helped establish the Bloc Québécois, and the rest is history. As important as it would be to moving an agenda forward because your relationship with somebody is great, can it be equally damaging to moving files forward if you've had some, for example, heartbreaking rupture in the relationship?
Well, obviously, if the President of the United States, for example, because we're talking about him, if a foreign leader, for example, betrayed him on a deal that he thought he had with him, you would find that it would be a long time before your calls were returned, or that Canada's priorities were ever heard again. I mean, I remember when, before my time, when calls from very important people went unanswered. I remember, look, I can remember in 24 Sussex, when David Longhi was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and his government banned American ships from New Zealand waters because of the nuclear component.
Yes.
And so they banned him. And he sat in my living room and asked me to talk to George Bush so he could see him. And I did. I called Bush, President Bush, and he said no, but that he would arrange for Brent Scowcroft to have a coffee with him and thing. But no, look, the Americans play hardball. They don't fool around. If you try and put the dagger into them and see what'll happen to you. And so all of this nonsense in Canada about, boy, well, we had a prime minister go down there and really kick sand in their face and really kick them in the shins. Forget it. It's all a myth.
Which one's that a reference to?
I have no idea. But it's not, I'll tell you, it's not a posture I would recommend.
Understood. You and Monsieur Bouchard, do you speak anymore?
Look, that's a long time ago. We don't really have a relationship. He does his thing and I do mine.
I have heard from a very good source that he is open to a reconciliation with you. Would you be open to that?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into that.
Okay, fair enough. Let me turn to a happier subject. Well, happier in some ways and sadder in others. A few days ago, you turned 72 years old.
Yeah, that's right.
So happy birthday.
Why did you have to mention that?
Well, happy birthday, first of all, because that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I can remember having talked to you in the past where you've said it's a good day. Every day you wake up, you reach out to your right, you reach out to your left. If you don't feel a pine box, you're in good shape.
You're having a great day.
You're having a good day. Except that you recently discovered, and you've gone public with this, so I'm not asking you anything terribly private here, that you're a diabetic now.
That's right.
How has that changed your life?
Well, it dominates your life in the sense that, you have to deal with the requirements of insulin, and I have to inject insulin, 4 times a day.
In the stomach?
In the stomach. Morning, noon, night, before dinner, and then before I go to bed. And it's so your life, you're handcuffed by that new reality. That, I mean, I just can't pick up and go without all of my equipment here. Like going through the airports. I mean, somebody take a look at that. I think I was a drug dealer, with all this stuff I've got in there. Look, insulin, thank God for Banting and Best, the great Canadian discovery. I can live a full life and a good life, provided I'm reasonable and I follow the rules, which I do. I tell you, the thing that it has brought home to me was, you mentioned I'm 72. I came down with this when I was 71. So I'm on the back nine in this. So I was lucky. This didn't hit me until then. But I have great, enormous sympathy for young children, 4 or 5, who come down with juvenile diabetes and have to do this, what I'm doing. And their parents who have to live with this. But I've met a number of them. They're also courageous and good-humored. And it's not life-threatening unless you decline to accept the expertise. So I've got great doctors in Canada here, and I do my stuff every day, and I'm doing fine. I feel great. I feel better than I did. So it is what it is, and I consider myself fortunate that I got this far without it.
You've had a few health scares, though, along the
did,
way.
yeah.
And how much do you think about your mortality as a result of all that?
Well, I almost bought the farm.
I know it.
About 5 years ago here in Montreal, when they thought I wouldn't survive the weekend. At that time, it was Mila and the children and that were of such concern to me, still are. But when you come that close and you manage to dodge the bullet, you appreciate a little more everything that's been given to you. And so I try and I exercise every day. I don't drink, I don't smoke. I'm boring as hell, and I try and.
You used to be a lot more fun.
Oh, you're darn right. Yeah, years and years ago, darn tootin'.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
How old was your father when he died?
He was 61.
So you got well past him.
I did.
When you got to 61, did you think to yourself, my dad only got to here?
I really did. He was a great man, electrician in a paper mill. Had 2 jobs to raise his family, and never had a nickel.
How much do you regret that he didn't get to see you become PM?
Enormously. My mom did, and thank God for that. She was with us all the way through. But I have great regrets about that when I was able to do things for him or to show him things and so on, that he had gone. But I think he knows. I think he keeps an eye on things. Yeah.
Get comfortable, because this next question is going to take a bit of setup. I know it is fashionable in some circles to say that you are the most unpopular prime minister of all time, and who knows, you may very well have been, but I think in some places you like to wear that as a bit of a badge of honor, because that means you did big things. 5 years ago, you were designated Canada's greenest prime minister ever by Corporate Knights magazine. Even Elizabeth May agreed. A decade ago, 2 professors in this city, McGill, released a study saying you had the best economic record of any prime minister in the last half of the 20th century. Free trade, GST, helping to end apartheid, leading the way on sanctions on South Africa. I could go on. Mr. Mulroney, if I may put it this way, you were making a bit of a comeback in the public's esteem. But then came the Karl-Heinz Schreiber business.
I'm not going to get into that. That's done and that's over. He's in jail in Germany, and it's a matter that's been resolved, and I have no intention of getting into it in any way. But thank you for asking.
No, I hear you, and I'm not going to replicate the elephant inquiry here. But
look, Mr. Chrétien came through a real scandal. $60 million were stolen from the public treasury. 7 or 8 members of the party here went to jail in Montreal.
The sponsorship, you mean?
Sponsorship scandal. Sir John A. Macdonald had the CPR scandal. You run into all kinds. Mr. Chrétien was no more guilty than Sir John A. was. You run into all kinds of people in politics, and this stuff happens. So you've got to just move on. It'll be in history what the CPR scandal is to Sir John A. Macdonald. Very little.
A footnote.
A footnote.
Does it bug you that some people will choose to recall that rather than your list of many accomplishments?
Not a bit. It's the way life is. It's just the way life is. There are some people who view life negatively and who are happy to remind people of any failings that they may have. As you said, I was 72. I can remember saying that, at that time I'm 70, and I've lived a full life, and I've known a lot of people. And I don't think I know a single person who's 70 or over who can say at the end of his life that his life was perfect, that he never made a mistake, that he never made an error of judgment, that everything was perfect. I don't know anybody like that. So this is what happens in life.
I'm going to press you one more time, and you can tell me to get lost if you want, but I'll try one more. You kind of painted a big target on your back for your enemies, though. I mean, you've been getting the upper hand on your critics for so many years.
Don't you worry about my enemies. They're few and far between, and history will deal with all of that. Don't you worry about that, Steve. You got other things to worry about.
Okay, moving on. I guess despite your protestations that you don't follow this stuff that carefully anymore, I'm going to finish up on, we're in a silly season here, right? We're about to go to the polls in this country. There's a tradition that former leaders don't get too involved in stuff, but they've got opinions. What are you thinking?
Well, it's what I don't have an opinion on any policy because I don't know what the campaign is going to be.
You're voting for Mr. Harper, I presume.
At this point, I'll vote for the Conservative candidate in my constituency. But look, as I told you, I think Canada's fortunate in the sense that you have 4 good people leading the major political parties, which means that at the end of the day, whatever happens, they'll either come together or a prime minister will act alone, but they'll come together, and I think they'll do some big things for Canada.
Excuse me, do you think there's anything illegal, illicit, or illegitimate about a Liberal NDP coalition with the Bloc's support, if that's the way it comes back?
Look, my expectation is that all of the leaders will tell you that they're going to form a government themselves, which is what they should say. And they should not speculate in any way about coalitions or all of this nonsense. They should be out there trying to win, remembering that polls do not count. The voters count. You mentioned something about reporters saying about my unpopularity and so on. Listen, I won the largest victory in the history of Canada. I won my next one in similar fashion. I was never defeated. I was the first political leader to win back-to-back majorities of any political party in 35 years, and I was the first Conservative to do it in 100 years.
Johnny MacDonald.
I was only one of 3 leaders who won 50% of the seats and more than 50% of the popular vote. And I could go on. But so what? What does this mean? It doesn't mean anything.
Well, it means you know a thing or two about politics.
Yeah, it
so
does.
You want to give some advice to these guys?
But unless you use that, popularity is meaningless. Unless you use it to do big and good things for your country and for the people of Canada, then it's meaningless. Who cares? Listen, I'll give you an illustration. When Harry Truman left the presidency in January of 1953, he and his wife Bess went outside and they got in their car and they drove down to Independence, Missouri, back to his hometown. And when he got there, he was greeted by a headline and you talk about a guy involved in scandals and you name it. By the time he got back, there was a headline in the Kansas City Star said, Gallup says Truman most unpopular leader in the history of polling.
And he was.
And he was. Mm-hmm. And 45 years later, in a major study by all American leading scholars of the presidency, it was determined that Harry Truman was the 5th greatest president in the history of the Republic. And what does that tell you? It tells me 2 things. First, this nonsense about popularity is meaningless. And secondly, major achievements will always rid history of the trivia and trash, and you will see leaders in their true complexion in the fullness of time.
But I'm inferring that you're bringing this up because you think you got a raw deal while you were there.
No, I brought it up because you brought it up.
Oh, okay.
That's why I didn't bring it up at all.
But you
I'm
believe...
just responding to what,
okay, no, that's fair.
You brought.
That's fair enough. But
I don't think I got a raw deal. I won all my elections. What can I complain about?
Well, you didn't get the best press, let's put it that way.
But you know, I'm trying to make the point. I'm trying to tell you, who cares about the press?
But is it your sense that history, over the course of time, will start to see you in a much better light than perhaps the media of the day did?
I mean, look, the media of the day, they're entitled to their opinion. I read the other day, and I quoted it. There was a quote about Sir John A. Macdonald's, the unveiling of his portrait. And the Globe and Mail said that day, the day after Sir John unveiled his portrait, "This is the most corrupt rascal that ever dominated politics in Canada. He's a man of no achievement, no principle, no honor, and he should be dismissed immediately. Sir John A. Macdonald, the founder of our country, who built Canada with his own hands and shaped our destiny, a great man. That was the opinion of the media about the greatest leader we've ever produced. Why should I care about what some guy thinks? History will decide that.
Mr. Mulroney, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much for sitting down with us.
Thank you.